Good afternoon from Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. Good morning to those of you who are on the other side of the meridian, where it's still morning. We've just gone noon. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this Africa and Middle East Summit session of the Open Government Partnership Summit today. My name is Aiden Eyakuze. I'm Executive Director at Twaweza East Africa, and I'm also the incoming Civil Society Co-Chair of the OGP. It's my real pleasure to welcome you to this discussion. We're going to be talking about next frontiers in shaping our societies to improve lives through inclusion, equality, and participation. So maybe just to give you a quick one, if you need to listen to me in French, I think you need to press on the globe and find the interpretation, and you will be hearing us in French. If you need to speak in English, I think you connect on the English side. Secondly, please be active in the chat with your questions or comments from what you're going to hear. And if you are on Twitter, you can use hashtag OGP Africa and also hashtag OGP Summit. So let's get started. Here, just some quick facts about Africa and the Middle East in terms of the OGP. We have 26 active OGP members at the moment, national and local. And over the past decade, we have produced 52 OGP action plans since 2011 and 470 open government commitments, 64 around equality, 216 commitments around public participation, and 123 anti-corruption commitments. But what have they amounted to, really? What have they led to? And I want to quote here the Minister for Finance from Nigeria, Madam Zainab Ahmed, who once said to me, does the OGP put an extra chicken in the pot? And I want us to talk a little bit about how we can actually use this concepts of inclusion and equality and participation to improve concretely the lives of our concitoyens, as they call them, our fellow citizens of the region, Africa and the Middle East. So this discussion will be in two parts. The first part, we have a panel of three wonderful people, and we'll get to meet them in a moment. But we're going to talk a bit inspiration. You know, we want to see if we can inspire the African community, open government community, with high-level leadership from government, from civil society and business. And then we're also going to try and be practical. What actually works? Using open government principles, can we renew our communities and countries and the region as we respond and recover from the COVID-19 pandemic? So let's get started with the panel. And I'm going to start with some questions that hopefully will inspire us and how they're motivated. So Minister Clem and Madam Obi, let me first start by asking you, before I introduce you, if I can call you by your first names so that we can keep this nice and informal. Is that okay?
It's very okay.
Please go ahead.
Lovely, thank you. It's great to see you. So we have for about 45 minutes together. So let's start by getting a glimpse into your own personal motivations for public service and to work for citizens. So let me start with you, Madam Obi. You are the chair of the School of Politics, Policy and Governance. You've been a vice president of the World Bank. You're a huge role model for Africa's young and, like me, not so young citizens. We look up to you. So what inspired you and what compels you to public service and leadership? And who maybe is your role model?
My dad. My dad was a quintessential public servant. He was so well known for his uncompromising stance that those who have had the privilege of education must spend their privilege on behalf of those who have not had similar opportunity. And so that public service is really what it should be. It is service. It is not a place to subordinate your private interest, to subordinate the common good to your private interest. So he was really such a model, and making sure that I would do something in public service, because at heart, I'm a person that believes in enterprise, but spending time in public service was important for me. And that's why once I spent my time, I wasn't going to just continue being minister for one regime after another regime after another regime. I think that's an idea of corporate welfare, and I don't believe in it.
Right. So and then so you're staying in public service. You're even teaching people or communities through your school of politics, policy, and governance. What is it that you're trying to achieve with that school?
So you know that the continent is in trouble. The continent has a ruling class that totally has set in place, or perhaps even entrenched, a political culture that with impunity subordinates the common good to the private and narrow interests of a very small structure within society. And that is not good, because that's the basis of the overall poverty, where our continent, it trails the development, performance of the rest of the world in the last couple of decades. So if to that extent, we see that there are challenges of leadership, which you would see comes up every time we discuss. People don't sort of say the issues in Africa are purely technical. They are adaptive problems, and they reside in the place of leadership challenge that we have as a continent, which we must accept. And so when you look at this political class that we have across the continent, there is a problem. We must, decode or rather crack the leadership problem. We need to, crack the code of leadership for our continent. And that means we must train a different kind of leadership mindset. The leadership mindset that we currently have is not one that is productive and creative. It is one that tends toward extraction. And extraction has not enabled the society at all. We don't have shared values with our leaders in most of the times. You don't see inclusion as the basis for society. You don't even see an acceptance of the role of leadership to be accountable. Accountability is the hallmark of effective leadership. And without it, our continent, is permanently in trouble.
It's a difficult one, that one, accountability, because everybody seems to want to run away from it. So let me go to Clem. Clem, you are the federal minister, Federal Ministry of Budget and National Planning in the government of Nigeria. Huge country, huge responsibility. So what drives you personally to do what must be very challenging work, including making tough decisions about who gets public funds and who doesn't on a daily basis? So what drives you personally?
Yeah, first, good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. I just listened to Dr. Obi and what drives her motivation. Mine is growing up was challenging for me personally, but not just for me, but the people around me, because I was privileged. I had a father who was a king and who could make some provisions, and I moved around a lot with him around the rural communities, and I could see the despair in the eyes of people. I could see the living conditions of people around me. And I always said to myself, I wish someday I would be in a position to be able to give back, because I do believe that service to humanity is the best work of life. So how to alleviate the challenges and the sufferings of people? I used to see my mother cook every day and give out to others. And she always told me what is important is being able to give back to those who cannot give you. So, like I said, I have been very, very privileged. I got good education, good opportunities for jobs. So all that is left is how to give back. And considering what I had seen in the rural communities, now that I am in a position to be able to allocate resources that are scarce, I think about these rural poor who represent 60% of our population. I think about these rural poor who produce 80% of the food that we consume in our country. So I begin to preach amongst my colleagues, and even as we were working on the National Development Plan, that there is a need to segregate and remove rural development from agric as it used to be, so that we can give it the needed attention. And then we focus on agric as an integrated rural focus on integrated rural development, where we begin to take infrastructure to these rural areas. So in terms of resource allocation, you begin to say, Ministry of Communication and Digital Economy, what's your plan for these rural areas? We want you to take broadband technology to these areas. Ministry of Agri, you need to focus on building rural roads, especially around these agro corridors, because the farmers are putting in so much to work, but they are getting so little from it. But when you create an access to the market in these areas, it attracts investors to those areas, some who want to aggregate the food that has been produced, because currently 60% of what is produced is lost. That's post-harvest loss, which is huge. You produce 10,000 tons, you get only 4,000. So we are beginning to allocate resources to these areas. The last year alone, we worked on 495 rural roads. So I understand the negative impact of misusing funds. And that's why even with the COVID intervention, I had been going around the country to see for myself what is being done. Because I do believe that you have to monitor or you have to inspect what you expect. Because if you don't inspect it, then what you eventually will get is something that you don't expect, you know, and at that time it will be too late to deal with it.
Okay,
so
let me pause you there and invite our third panelist, because we're going to get into the meat of what you're actually doing to put a chicken in every pot. And I have a distinct pleasure to welcome Dr. Vera Songwei, who is the UN Undersecretary General and Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa. Good morning or good afternoon, Dr. Songwei. How are you? I think you're on mute. We can't hear you. Oh.
But Dr. Song's name is showing as Aidan. It's displaying as Aidan.
Oh. Yes, it is, I know. But I don't know why we can't hear Vera. Maybe somebody in the technical side can help us. That's very... Now her name is showing as Vera.
Yeah.
But we
and
still...
she's muted.
You're muted.
Okay. It's okay now.
Still can't hear you, unfortunately. Maybe you could stay with us while we are sorting out the sound challenge. Our apologies, Dr. Songwei. While we're doing that, maybe I could go back to Madam Obi. We'll come back to you, Clem. Let's see. Madam Obi, let's jump into some of the challenges that the continent is facing, as you mentioned. This pandemic has been a huge setback for human capital development on the continent. Let me give you an example. Uganda's students have been out of school for 2 years, and teen pregnancy rates have increased by 25%. Education and gender equality have taken a massive hit. So, Madam Obi, how should African leaders secure and protect resources to invest in the future of girls and women as part of addressing the inclusion challenge of the continent? How can we protect and ensure that those resources that are meant to educate girls and women actually reach them and benefit them? What ideas do you have, Madam Obi? Oh, I think Madam Obi may have gone. Yes, she may have gone. Maybe I asked you that question, Minister Clem. How can African leaders secure and protect resources to invest in the future of girls and women, especially in these trying times of COVID-19, when all the resources are squeezed? And give us some examples of what you're trying to do, especially in that issue of human resource development, human capital development.
Yeah, for me, I think that one thing that African leaders need to do is to bridge that gap first, the trust gap between the citizens and government. And one way of doing that is to be more transparent in what one is doing. And transparency can only be shown by inclusiveness. When you include the citizens and you have them engaged in the various processes, you begin to bridge that gap. And as you make plans for them, you realize that they have to be involved in the planning process itself. Because you're only there for a couple of days or months or years, but the country is going to remain, or the continent will remain forever. And so the way to do it is that whatever it is that you want to do, you bring in the various diversities that you have in your country. What we have done, for instance, in Nigeria, as a minister responsible for national planning, is in putting together our national development plan, which is the 2021 to 2025. It's for government to take the back road. We took the back road and we were just facilitating. You know, we looked at our economy and said that this economy is currently being driven by the organized private sector, which represents about 92% of our gross domestic product. And then we said the private sector should drive the plan. Okay. And then we also looked at, this is a federation. You know, a federal government plan cannot be a national plan. And if the country is made up of 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory, it therefore means that those states, you know, the federating units have to be involved to develop a plan that suits what they want. Because when you talk about terms of human capital development, you know, the needs and the requirements differ from regions to region. And so it's very important that all were brought together. And the plan, the result of what we got from this plan is a strategy to engage, to empower, and to employ our youths, especially with a huge focus on skills development. You know, looking at it only from the side of government, maybe government would have thought all we need to do is to build the schools, put the infrastructure, and then leave it at that. That itself is not education. For education to be qualitative, it is the content of what the students get that matters. And you can only have that content if you have qualified teachers. You can only have that content if the teachers are there. And you can also only have that content when we begin to teach our people things around us. Not that Mungo Park discovered River Niger, which he didn't, because Africans were living by the River Niger, and Africa discovered River Niger. So inclusiveness, participation, engagement would help bring in more clarity and help in our human capital development.
But maybe I could ask you, Dr. Clem, I mean, we're talking about trying to recover from a massive pandemic. You've seen what the Omicron, I'll call it sort of scandal, has done when many African countries were shut out. It squeezes our resources, even our revenue generating capacity if tourism is suffering. You sit where you are, you see the cash flows coming in, you see the cash needs for Nigeria. To what extent are these issues of participation, of fairness and equality exercising you every day in the decisions that you make under these very trying conditions, very trying fiscal conditions? How far up or down your sort of consciousness are these issues, these principles?
For me, I've seen the COVID from a positive angle, because it opened for us a lot of vista of opportunities. It makes it now much easy for government to reach out to people. You can see how we are talking now. It's as if we are in the same room. You know, in the past, even the issues of our budgets, you know, engaging citizens was an issue. Okay, you could only get as many as 100 or 200 Nigerians from a population of about 211 million, you know, to discuss the budget. So I see COVID from really a positive angle, that it has opened a lot of new vistas of opportunities. And it's making us much more effective and much more efficient in the way we even collect our revenues. In the past, a lot of our processes were manual. Now we are building efficiencies into our collection system. So we are getting more revenues now, beginning to increase, especially where in Nigeria, our non-oil revenue. Because if you look at our revenue profile, oil used to play the dominant role. But right now, oil is only contributing 35% to our national revenue. So again, I come back to the fact that COVID has made it possible. It also for us to be more restrained in the way and manner we use our funds. It has also made us to concentrate more on the needs rather than our wants. It has also shown us the areas of vulnerabilities in terms of our infrastructure, especially, for instance, our health infrastructure, where in Nigeria we had to dedicate a sizable amount of money to bring up those infrastructure and build some form of resilience in the health sector.
Let's talk a little bit about one of the upsides you mentioned of the pandemic. But maybe let me try. Sorry, Minister Clem, I see Vera Songwei is back. Dr. Songwei, can you hear us? We still can't hear you, unfortunately, which is a problem. It seems like the sound is not coming through to us. Unless I'm the only one who can't hear Dr. Songwei. Can anybody else hear her?
I can hear her too.
You can't hear her either, right? We hope that our technical gurus will sort that problem out, which is a shame, because we'd love to get your perspective, Dr. Songwei, on a number of these issues we're talking about. Minister Clem, back to you. Let's talk about the positive side. You mentioned the issue of technology and internet. How should governments ensure that digital technologies promote transparent governance across Africa? In other words, how can digital technologies become democracy affirming? Because you know what? They've actually been used to do the opposite. How should governments deal with this challenge?
Yeah, for me, is first to ensure that the technology is available and it gets to reach the mass of the people, and that. But we also should know too that with technology there are also some challenges that go with it, because as it makes the business easy to be done, so that's the same way it also makes crime a lot easy. Maybe issues around illicit financial flows and the rest of them. But government role really here is to ensure the availability of it, to also ensure that it is not stifled in terms of regulation, to also ensure that it gets to the mass of the people, not just those in the urban areas, that's the urban elites. And I believe that as government puts those funding into those digital infrastructure, that a lot of things become easier, and then the engagements become also much easy. Like I said, last year during the heat of COVID, when we had to revise our national budget, we used technology to reach out to Nigerians. And for the first time, we were able to reach Nigerians in diaspora. So we found that Nigerians in the Americas, in Europe, in South Africa, in East Africa, joined in the conversation. At some point, as we were thinking about building back better, we also had some high-level roundtables where we even got the OGP Secretariat in DC to be with us. Sanjay was with us and he listened to the conversation. So you see that more and more as government uses technology, the red tapeism in government also begins to disappear. The bureaucracies begin to be reduced, and then you find that there is more efficiency and reduction in the use of papers.
Minister, there's a question from somebody in Kenya here on the chat. Her name is Carol Kiangura, and here's a question, a perfect one for you. She would like to hear from you. And
can you hear?
Oh, Dr. Vera, we can hear you. Yes.
Finally.
Welcome. Minister Clare, we'll park that question for now. Dr. Songwei, welcome. And thank you so much for struggling for half an hour to make sure you join the conversation. Good morning and good afternoon.
I'm so sorry, but I think this is the beauty of technology. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm in Ethiopia, so it's good afternoon for us. Is that there's many doors to get in, so there we are, we're in.
It's excellent. It's great to see you. So let me, COVID-19, this Zoom thing. Let me start by asking you, how has this pandemic really disrupted your work? I'm looking here for drivers, your motivation for engaging in public service. So we've got this COVID-19 pandemic. How has it disrupted your work, both in terms of the content, what you're doing, and also how you're doing it? And how are you navigating this pandemic upheaval, both personally and professionally?
No, thank you. Thank you very much. Great to see good old friends and new people. And I've been sorry interrupting, coming in and out, but I think what it has done in many ways, interestingly enough, is that it has democratized our work a little bit more, right? We can do this. We can be on panels with many more people. Many more people have access to the things we're doing, know what we're doing. And that has been, I think, initially a little bit of, it needed adjustment, right? Because we had gotten used to those people who could travel to one location, we'll all travel, we'll meet friends and we'll reinforce ourselves. And there was no questioning of our effectiveness. But I think with the pandemic, because the platform has become a more open platform, talking about open government, we have had a more open platform. It's been easier to actually interact and to get reactions about what we are not doing well and what we're doing so well and what we could do more of. And I think that has been particularly important for us, because then, and also the feedback is quite instant, right? You're on a chat in Zoom and you say something and somebody says, I don't agree, or gives you the latest paper. And so really, I think there has been a very sort of instantaneous feedback loop that has been quite useful. I also think that because of the crisis and maybe the need, people all struggling, and I take maybe the example of finance ministers. Before the crisis, we didn't have, our board is the finance ministers of the continent. We had relationships with a few here and there, but never really a sort of collective voice of sort of African finance ministers. And with the crisis, we were able to bring together African finance ministers in we used to meet them twice a year. Now we meet almost every 6 weeks. So I think there was a need for people to feel as part of a community and to find communal solutions, which also then meant that we were able as African finance ministers to go to the world in one big coalition and speak. And our voices began to be heard better because of that. And so the second thing is, I think the crisis, so it democratized us in terms of who listened to what we said, but I think it empowered us, because as a community, we were much stronger when we went to the G20, because people now knew, oh my God, all the African finance ministers just met. They're actually going to say something. And then you have the IMF saying, I want to meet all the African finance ministers. Can you make the podium? The World Bank, can you? And so we were able to create, I think, a strength that we had never been able to fill out before. And that for me has been hopefully something that we can carry on, beyond the crisis, in terms of how we, and OGP, for example, all the work on sort of open government. It was much easier now to know who was putting out statistics and data and expenditures, right. COVID expenditures, and we were able to talk about it much faster and see, is Nigeria's data out today, or is Kenya's data out? And it has also helped competition, because we know that when people, the good thing about the continent today is there is this emulating effect, right? Yeah. And so if we start praising Ghana for putting out all its information, then, Rwanda wants to do it and South Africa wants to do it. And I think that has fast-tracked, I think, some of the things we've been struggling to do, OGP and all of us, for a very long time, which is transparency on data use, data expenditures and things like that. Voices of people like Kenneth Odede, have become big voices because they have this kinds of platforms. They can speak to 600 people all at the same time and tell us about, the haves and the have-nots and closing those gaps. So for me, I think while COVID has been very depressing, while the sort of, we're all still struggling to see how Africa gets out of this, depression. It's first in 25 years. The IMF says we need $425 billion to get out of it. We're struggling to look for those resources. But I think there is a strength in the fact that we can now go to do that collectively, and probably we win. And we are beginning to see some wins from COP26, because Africa came together and said, we need gas. You keep gas on the table because that's our transition. We actually people began to listen to us. I don't think, had we not been using this kinds of platforms, we probably would have lost the gas battle, which is so essential for Africa's development going forward.
It's so interesting. Thank you so much, Dr. Vera. Both of you and Clem agree on the fact that these platforms have been democratized. They've essentially opened a little bit of a door or a window for us outsiders to look in how you do it. I'm sure it has made life a little bit more complicated, maybe intense on your end. But let me ask you, how do you then persuade others who are maybe less ready to open those doors for citizens to participate in processes? How are you as leaders, start with you, Vera, and then to Clem, creating spaces and persuading, the government leaders you talk to that actually this is productive, it is inclusive, and it can be it can lead to good results. What are you saying to them to persuade them to open up the space for citizens to engage?
I think two things, and that's a great question. Just 2-3 weeks ago, a month ago, we launched something called the Young Economists, the ECA, Economic Commission for Africa Young Economists Network. Amazing turnout. 723 young economists, 26 universities across the continent. And the idea there is to say, governments in this crisis are trying to figure out what is the growth projection or getting out of this crisis. How do we do it? And they come to ECA, they go to the World Bank, they go to the IMF, the African Development Bank. But each one of us as an institution is too small to be able to respond to these big questions. In each country, we have 6 or 7 universities that have economics departments. And we say to the government, work with them as well. Let them be your think tank, your free think tank, right? And maybe they do analysis for you, and then we can sit down and debate the results together. And that is beginning to pay some results, because countries are saying, yes, why do I need to hire a consultant when I have 18 students in the Department of Economics that can run those and can continuously engage? And hopefully eventually some of them may end up working in the Ministry of Planning or the Ministry of Economics, or the Ministry of Finance or something. So I think it's showing the government what is the benefit, right? Normally governments are worried about civil society because we're always demanding and exposing them. But I think if we can go with saying, let's collaborate together and discuss these conversations, then it works. And I think that's part of the what we are trying. So we are doing it. We're opening ECA. We brought in 32 young fellows that have come and are with us at ECA, and we're saying, look, these are the young fellows that are coming to help you, but they're coming from your universities. So let's work with your university as in a broader space. And I think we're getting some traction from that space. So that's a lesson that we learned that we're now taking to government. And I think we've seen some positive reaction. Let's see how it goes when those universities start sort of putting out reports that are countering the budget, and then, we will test it at that point. But in the beginning, it looks like it's working.
That's great. So there's participatory policy making on your side, Vera. I'm going to come back to you, Clem, right now and revisit that question about participatory budgeting. So the lady from Kenya was asking, your experience in the Ministry of Budget on mechanism that you put in place to improve and ensure quality participatory budgeting, where truly citizens make decisions about budget expenses, not just recommendations, decisions, and where the power is in their hands. How do you do that? How far along that continuum are you, and what do you advise to other budget managers such as yourself?
Okay, like I did say, we've opened up this space a lot more to get citizens engaged in the budget process. One thing that I have noticed along the line is that citizens haven't paid a lot of attention to the plan. And so you know that budgets have to be tied to plans. So you don't just wake up in the morning and decide that this is what should be in the budget. And that is why one of the things that we have done is we had an opportunity of developing a new plan. We had to ensure that it was seriously inclusive, engaging, and participatory. In the past, what I understood was that they would get a consultant, a firm to just put together a plan and then get a couple of Nigerians to agree on it. But what we did this time, we went over and beyond, especially in the administrative setup that was given. We had 3 layers where you had a national steering committee led by the organized private sector, co-chaired from the government side, and the co-chairing was just mainly for the purposes of facilitation and providing the required logistics. And at that level, at that national steering committee level, we had to ensure that the various diversities that we had are carried along, starting from the political parties. At the Senate level, we have 3 political parties. And those, the 3 chairmen were written to either come in themselves or send in representatives to participate in the development of the plan. We looked at the sub-nationals, who are the states and the local government, and ensured that each state was represented. So at the National Steering Committee level, you have 6 governors representing the 6 geopolitical zones. And at the Central Working Committee was the Governors Forum. But more importantly, where the real work is done is at the technical working group. So each of the states had to send in representatives. They had 2 each. And then we have 774 local governments in the country. So we had to meet with Algon to send in representatives to those technical working groups. And then they were also represented at the central and at the National Steering Committee. I'm just going into all of this to show you how far out we reach, because the basis for a budget should be the plan. And so if all Nigerians come together to put a plan together, and then therefore the budget will not necessarily have to flow from the plan. So one of the things that we have also done is to have 2 more volumes of the plan. The first volume is the plan itself. The second volume identified the programs and projects that are prioritized and costed to be carried out, so that on a year-to-year basis, you now begin to tie the budget to those programs and projects. And then the third volume that we had is the legislative imperative, because like I said, the economy is driven by the private sector, but the private sector is over-regulated. We have laws that are impeding their growth. You know, we talked about revenue issues. You can't drive those revenues if the private sector does not grow. The MSMEs, if they don't grow. So you find that state and local government are taxing, states are coming up with their own taxes, the federal government coming up with its own taxes. So there's multiplicity of taxes, and the private sectors are not being encouraged. And that's why we brought in a lot of these private sector groups in the development of the plan, so that they can come in with their own perspective. And
they're actually participating in that whole process, because it's quite an intricate process you've described. And I'm assuming that there is a lot of citizen and maybe non-government participation in that whole process.
Yes, first we even had OGP represented. My co-chair of the steering committee was in the central working group, you know. And so again, like I said, a lot of youth participation. This is a nation of prayers. Even where people don't do what they should, they wake up in the morning and they start praying and expect miracles to happen. So we brought in both the leadership of the Muslim and the Christian groups to participate, so that no one would say that this is a plan developed for Muslims or a plan developed for Christians. So with all of these, then is the budget now flows from the plan, and then we now come up with our medium-term expenditure framework, and then the public hearings and all of that.
Let me pause you there, Clem. Let me pause you there and maybe invite Obi, because I see Madam Obi is back. There's a question in the chat here which speaks to inclusion and digital. We said digital sometimes can be, has been a boon in this time of COVID. But the question is this: one of the concerns about digital connection, a digitally connected world, is that poor women who have less access to data and equipment may end up being even further marginalized. What advice do you give to governments, even to civil society, on how this can be addressed, right? And particularly as it relates to poor and marginalized women, how can we bring them in well into the conversation, the decisions that are making their lives? Madam Obi, and then maybe over to you, Vera.
Yes, I think that one of the things we know is that we can design for technologies that really address the challenges that the poor have with technology. So technology can also solve the problems of the poor. So let's not assume that the poor that their problem is insurmountable through technology. What it means is that government would have to prioritize low-scale technology that would also enable and support the poor at even a more wholesale basis. The scale of the use of technology by the poor, for example, one of the things when I used to be on the board of Airtel in India was, the fact that the investment by government together with the telecom companies to ensure that at community levels, that citizens could access technology services. We are not following the same path in a way that is, as remarkable as what the Indians have done. We do need to look at the rural populace and understand that we can boldly use technology to also address their exclusion by ensuring that the public-private partnership that enables and supports technology hubs at rural communities would give them the access that is necessary. But it cannot be something that we leave to the market alone. The idea that ultimately the market will find the rural communities is a wrong approach. I'm a market-oriented person, but I do know that when it comes to the matter of integrating the poor, which often in Africa would be the young people as well as the women in rural communities, we must be deliberate in the way that policy is designed to work together with private sector to even cross-subsidize in an efficient way. I'm not, I hate the thought of subsidy because it's often abused on our continent, but there is a way to do a market-efficient access to technology at the rural level, working together with the private sector.
Let me ask you, Dr. Vera, you have a bird's eye view over the continent and the region's economy. Are you seeing governments making the kinds of investments that are as inclusive as what Dr. Obi is saying we should? Or is the market really determining where the infrastructure goes and therefore perhaps even deepening the kind of exclusion that has been described? Digital exclusion, gender exclusion.
Well, I mean, the short answer is no. But the long-winded answer is because governments are losing fiscal space because of the crisis, revenues are dropping and all, they don't have the resources. But that's where, again, it's there is contestability in what investments government should be putting on. The ILO just put out a report that said that I think only 17% of African countries actually have social protection programs in place that could help with the issue of inclusion. But I think we do need to look at it from two ends, right? It's what kinds of social protection programs, and there I think African countries are correct. We don't want social protection programs that are just, resource handouts when we don't have the resources. We want maybe programs that are road, food for work programs where you're building a road, so you're increasing your asset base while also providing some resources to those that do not have. I think in terms of gender, One of the things that the African Union has been doing is, and the Economic Commission for Africa, we now have this gender index where we're looking at, how many countries have more women in the judiciary, how many countries have more women in policy making, how many have more women in the legislative. We're making progress, but I think it has not been the crisis, it has been the conflicts that have taken women away, because when there are conflicts, then ministries tend to go to the men, the defense ministry, and where we had women in some of those ministries, Kenya as an outlier, of course, we're seeing the women giving space to the men to come back in some sense, and that has weakened a little bit the conversation. But I think that what we're beginning to see is a lot of our leaders focusing on women in business, and I think that's an area where there is a lot more happening. But it's difficult to focus on women in business when your interest rates are very high because your macro is messed up. And hence, because the minute, it is the country's sort of sovereign rating that determines the sort of banking sector rating and then the informal sector interest rates. So if the sovereign interest rate is 10%, the women's interest rate is 20. And so I think some work needs to be done in that space. President Tshisekedi just had a big conference called the Conference of I don't know how you translate it in English, masculinity positive masculinity, if you want.
Positive masculinity, yes.
Exactly, with the he for she in some sense. And I think we had 6 African presidents that attended, President Macky Sall, President Kagame, President Kufuor. Clearly, I think trying to demonstrate, how they can give more space to women and gender. But the inclusion conversation, I think, must start with including them in policy making. As Obi said, including them in it's one thing to speak, but policies are most demonstrated in the budget. If you say everything you say and you don't budget for it, then you didn't say it. And I think we need more access to understanding what that budget line is. And Kenya, I think, again, saying, 30% of our procurement must go to women is, I think, part of that inclusion story that the rest of the continent can pick up and see how they take it forward. Yeah.
Fantastic. We learned from that Kenyan legislation. I have a final question for all of you, and I'm going to quote Rahm Emanuel, President Obama's chief of staff, once said, "You never want a serious crisis to go to waste." And what he meant by that was that this is an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before. So for each of you, in 1 minute each, how should we, as the OGP family, African leaders, citizens, make sure we do not waste this pandemic crisis? What is the one thing that we couldn't do before that we can do now that we should exploit to improve our recovery and our renewal in the future? Start with you, Dr. Songwei, then we'll go to Madam Obi, and we'll end with Minister Clem. One thing that we should do to not waste this crisis.
OGP, how should we not waste this crisis? How about now that we know that we have these kinds of platforms, once a month you take one African country, you bring the finance minister, and we discuss line by line the budget in a public space.
Wow, Minister
Make
Clem,
budgets
that's
more
for you.
transparent. Make budgets more transparent. You have the tools now. We all know how to use them. Democratize the budget.
Oh, I like that idea very much. I should be non-partisan, but I really like that idea. Make our budgets more transparent. A month each we'll have to do 2 African countries per month in order to go through all 54 or so, right? So every 2 weeks. Madam Obi, what's the one thing we can do to improve transparency and participation and inclusion that we couldn't do before the crisis?
I think that the idea of Africa talking about post-COVID recovery with the rest of the world is is depressing. There is nothing to, what are we recovering into? We're going to recover into being laggards in terms of economic performance? No, I believe that one thing we can do is to reimagine an Africa where indeed these concepts that we're discussing today, inclusion, participation, accountability, become the hallmark of the relationship between citizens and government. And that is only entirely possible if citizens would be put at the center of the development process on our continent.
Fantastic. So we can raise our voices collectively as Africans and negotiate a much better space in the global recovery from the pandemic. And I think, again, this platform can really do that. Minister Clem, You are the one with the fingers on the purse strings. What is the one thing that you're going to do differently very quickly that you couldn't do before the pandemic?
The use of technology to monitor and evaluate our projects. And rather than have 40 people from the ministry go around the country inspecting 40,000 projects, I'd rather that 200 million Nigerians do it for us. And we've started the process of developing an app, which we have christened the iMac. It is a geospatial, it's going to use geospatial technology, so that once the budgets are passed, we'll layer it on the Nigerian map, and it will come with latitude and longitude, which we will download on that app. So Nigerians can go and see those projects themselves, so that in the future, we won't have a world-class bridge to be built on the budget and a wooden bridge is built. Those in those communities will be the one to get back to us with pictures clearly showing those latitude and longitude. And the app is about 90% ready.
We look forward to Nigeria's project album.
Moderator,
come and find your minister.
Moderator, I wanted to say that it is important to recognize that the technical solutions are easier. Yeah. We do have a real problem of adaptive leadership. The truth is the leadership is undermining the technical solution. So if there's one thing that we need to begin to think about is how the OGP conversation also looks at the issues of the leadership that undermines technical solutions.
Dr. Obi, I'm going to come and visit you personally for a tutorial on exactly that point of adaptive management to do this. Let me thank all three of you for your excellent contributions, some great ideas. Thank you for inspiring us with what drives you to be a leader, how you have managed to navigate this pandemic, the challenge of including people in making decisions like participatory budgeting. But those ideas at the very end, I think, are really fantastic. So thank you very much. You will be hearing from me and from us, I'm sure, in the coming year or so, in order to really make life better and to put that chicken into every African's pot. So thank you all very much. I am going to invite the rest of you to stay and go on to our next panel, which is going to be moderated by Edwin Ikuhoria, who is the One Campaign Africa Executive Director, and he has some fantastic speakers joining in. But from me here in Tanzania, have a great afternoon. Goodbye and kwaherini.
Awesome. Awesome session with Aidan. And I think indeed we've heard, fantastic commentary and propositions and examples and things that will need to happen, to really improve the inclusion space and the participatory space. And indeed, I think it is really time we take the conversation to another level by speaking with some other people that I know you've been eager to see. I have today, we're supposed to be 3 of us on the panel, but I do think that we will be, discussing with 2 people. And again, because we're in a pandemic and people got sick, and so there's nothing we can do about that. We just need to make the most of what we can. So again, welcome to this panel. And I just want to say thank you for staying on with us. And Theo, is there any housekeeping before we get on, or we should just go ahead? Please, could you just let us know if we should just shoot, or we could just, is there any housekeeping we need to do?
Please go ahead, Edwin.
Okay, thank you so very much. So today, on the panel with me today, I'm going to be talking with 2 amazing people. The first is going to be the Minister of Digital Transition and Administration Reforms. Yes, Gita, please, sorry if I don't get this right, Gita Mezo. Dr. Gita Mezo is a Moroccan minister in charge of digital transition and administration reform. Prior to her appointment, she worked as an entrepreneur and as an academic on developing digital solutions that have a strong socio-economic impact. She holds a PhD from the Carnegie Mellon University and a master's and bachelor's from the EPFL. Dr. Mezo received multiple international awards for her work. Please make welcome Dr. Mezo. Dr. Mezo, are you on? Thank you. please, I know that we may not be able to clap, but we should try and indicate. These days, this digital thing has some things like thumbs up or something. You're very welcome, Madam Minister. And the other person on the panel is a known face, the face we can't even, I don't know how to begin to describe her, but Aya Shebi. Aya Shebi is a multi-award winning Pan-African feminist. Indeed, she rose to prominence as a voice for democracy and a shot to global fame as a political blogger during the 2010-2011 Tunisia's revolution. She has served as the first ever African Union Special Envoy on Youth and the youngest diplomat at the African Union Commission's chairperson's cabinet in 2018 to 2021. So please make welcome our firebrand activist, Aya Shebi.
Thank you, Edwin. So good to see you.
Liz, you can. Yes, so this session really is talking about how do we really translate we should have been joined by Rebecca, but she's not well, like I said, and apologies from her. It was really unavoidable, but we also recognize that we're in a pandemic, all those kind of things can happen. But I want to start today, by basically just set the scene. So we've talked about the different approaches that have been, discussed on the first panel at a higher level, right? Let's come to reality. Let's come to making these things practical. Let's begin to discuss, how does inclusion really work? How does inclusion really work? And I will be speaking with Aya from the point of view of a youth, right? Who is really eager to shape things to ensure that young people get into the space. It's not just about seeking the space. And open government provides that platform. And so we want to talk, we're going to ask with a few questions. But as we are developing these questions, other questions can come out. And then I'd like to really get your thoughts from questions and answers from those of us who are participating. By the way, I work for the One Campaign. I'm sure I know I didn't introduce myself, but I work for the One Campaign as the Africa Executive Director. And I used to lead the transparency and accountability work for the One Campaign. And OGP, again, is one of my biggest passions. So please, just make me welcome too, so that it doesn't look like I did not welcome myself. So Aya, I'm going to start with you first. And the reason why it is important to get this question off the ground, indeed, 60% of Africa's population is estimated to be under 25. That figure has gone around, all over the place. And this number continues to grow every year. In fact, the evidence shows that this is the population that has been greatly affected the most by the pandemic through unemployment and poverty. Youth unemployment, poverty. Question I want to ask you, what do you think are the open government policy priorities that the government needs to focus on right now in order to turn the increase in youth population into an opportunity for transformation, especially for young girls? And the reason why the young girls will be emphasized is simply this: they are the worst hit, they are the worst affected, in this kind of situation. So what do you think are those key policy priorities that the government should focus on in order to really transform this emerging youthful population that is growing into real transformation on the continent? Your thoughts will be really welcome right now, Aya.
Thank you so much, Edwin. So good to see you. Madame la Ministre, bienvenue et c'est un plaisir de vous voir. And OGP family, it's so good to be here. Well, yes, African youth have been among the population that was the most affected by government response to the pandemic. So it's not as much as a health challenge for young people as much as it's an economic challenge. So unemployment is rising, they're further marginalized, and so on. And when I talked to young people early in the outbreak last year, March and April, they would say that it's the same for me to die of COVID-19 or in the Mediterranean or of hunger, because I do not enjoy my basic human rights as a young person. So now the question on how we build a generation of young leaders and citizen engaged, especially young women, I think we need to first talk about, do they have the opportunity to lead? Because in Africa, we're still at a conversation where young people are out of leadership. If we are discussing how young people can transform leadership, we are still talking about how young people can lead. So we cannot really go into providing recommendation for governments on young people being in the space of leadership without really analyzing what we have in Africa. And it's uniquely African that we have this generation gap in leadership. 60% is the average age of African leadership, and 20 is the average age of the population. There is a gap, and this disparity is at the core of governance principle. So we can, if we talk about inclusion and representativity, this question is essential for us. But let's talk about solutions. I think we all know we're the youngest population in the world, we're demographic dividend, we have potential, we're a force, and so on. But I think if we think about policy, orientation and solutions, last year, actually, during my mandate as Youth Envoy of the African Union, we encourage governments to get inspired by other governments, because the solution is here in Africa. We don't have to look for models of governance outside for inclusion. And they said to me, okay, give us some case studies that we can follow. So we published something called Greater Inclusion of African Youth in Public Service and Governance. And we put forward case studies for governments to adopt in their own government. I can mention 3 examples of them. One is the case of Namibia, where the president appointed the first presidential advisor on youth. And I'm here actually in Accra, where President of Ghana adopted our recommendation and appointed a special advisor on youth in February this year. And now we have about 5 or 6 special advisors at presidential level across the continent. There is the case of Rwanda. So they're building capacity of youth through government internships. We need youth to occupy government corridors in masses, just like we occupy the streets in masses. And we know the past decade, young people have been frustrated, and they went on the street to demand good governance and to demand transformation of governance. But if they're not in the system to understand governance and to influence governance, they're not all going to be employed by governments, but they have to understand how to navigate policy decision making. If they're employed by government, even better, they can digitalize, they can transform our traditional bureaucratic institutions. And the third case is Nigeria, lowering the age of youth in politics. Till today, many parliaments and many presidential positions have a ceiling of 40s. So how can young people really run for office if they're not even eligible? And also the removing the economic barriers to run for office, to be even a candidate for election. And Algeria tried a model of subsidizing the candidacy fees for young people running for elections. And even conversation now happening in Tunisia around election reform. We actually want to change the model of election for young people to run on equal footing and established political parties and be voted by their neighborhood, because a young person can win election within 10,000, 15,000 constituency without any campaign money. But if they compete against 100,000 constituency with established political parties, that would be really hard. So I think what I'm trying to say is that first, we have to recognize the generational and governance gap in Africa, and then we have to institutionalize what we call intergenerational co-leadership. That across generations, we have to lead together and we have policies that we can put in place, and not only because you need us for the legacy of these institutions, but because it works. It actually works. And there are many African countries who tried that, and we see greater inclusion of youth in governance.
Awesome, Aya, as ever. And indeed, I don't even know how to begin to describe the way you've so succinctly put out these principles and the case studies in different African countries, not outside of Africa, where these solutions that you're proposing are already taking place, and how we have already begun to see the transformation of the landscape in terms of youth inclusion in governance. And again, the open government principle is about inclusion, so that everybody's voice matters, and then there's the cooperation or co-creation between the governed and the governors, so that we can all create solutions that work for everybody. Thank you so much for those comments. I'll come back to you, but in the meantime, I just want to reach out to you, Dr. Mezu, please. COVID, the COVID-19 indeed has offered a stress test, for government institutions, for public administrative systems, for public services were found, and they were all found wanting, because we've seen that the inequality, the level of disparity between the haves and have-nots, is it about education? Is it about health? Those have become stark in our face. We could see those inequalities. I want to just ask you, with the level at which the poor and the marginalized have been affected, how can governments leverage digital governance to strengthen the public administration systems, so that we can at least reduce the inequality if we cannot eradicate them, and then of course, so that we don't also exclude more people and then protect those marginalized? How can we how can we, leverage this digital governance to do this? Would be great to get your thoughts, Dr. Mizo.
Yeah, so thank you, Edwin. Nice meeting you, Aya. So I would like first to thank the OGP for organizing this regional session. So as you mentioned, the effects of the pandemic, have been strong on everyone, but they were particularly strong on vulnerable populations, including women, children, elderly people, homeless, etc. So to counter these effects, the Kingdom of Morocco has taken many important measures. So guided by the vision of His Majesty the King Mohammed VI, may God assist him, Morocco has implemented an integrated plan to counter the spread of this pandemic. So the King initiated and created the special fund for the management of the coronavirus pandemic. Various actors, I'm talking about private sector, public sector, civil society, citizens, everybody contributed to this fund, which accounted for 3% of our GDP. It was a huge fund. And then we deliver, digital tools were critical to deliver this aids, because the mobile phone penetration in Morocco is huge. So we leverage this mobile phones to reach this affected people, which were mainly the workers in both the formal and informal sectors who lost their jobs or whose income were reduced. So digital tools were used to reach them and to deliver aids. So that was very important. Also, as at some time where the lockdown, everybody was home, the schools were closed, digital tools allowed us to continue delivering education to children. And there were a special arrangement talking about inequality. So for example, lessons were on TV, because almost everybody on Morocco has TV, so we didn't only rely on the internet, and also in the internet. And then on the internet, there were a special arrangement. So when you access lessons on the internet, that was free of charge. You were not children were not charged for accessing online lessons. So that helped reduce inequality. At least people were not left behind. There were also, for the health ministry, they set up a strong digital communication campaign. And I know, so when we say, actually, it was not only digital, multiple mediums, but TV, radio, newspapers, internet, everything was there because there were strong public awareness campaigns about preventive measures and the importance of vaccination. And actually nowadays, Morocco, 62% of the entire population, not just the eligible population, are vaccinated. And that ranks Morocco among the best ones in the world. And that's actually thanks to this massive awareness campaigns that were run. And also the king set up an example by being vaccinated on TV, and that helped raise the awareness of this. There were other multiple examples, is that, actually, thanks to digital tools, people were able to work remotely, so digital services were able to continue. And people that are extremely vulnerable, like pregnant women and some people who have some diseases, they were allowed to work remotely for even longer periods of time. And actually, so the public services were able to continue even though people were home. And that was because for a couple of months, we were completely at home. Also, as everybody was home, violence against women increased because they were at home the whole time. So a lot of violence against women incidents. So digital tools, phones, everything were set up to first raise awareness about the problem. And then there were tools where women could report these incidents so that they were to speed up interventions. Also, again, online shopping substantially increased during the pandemic, and that's people were able to get food, were able to get what they want without going out and meeting new people. So the online shopping helped us continue living, I wouldn't say normally, but continue at least having the kind of things we need without increasing our risk of contamination. It's very important. These are examples. It's very important to say that in Morocco, there is a before and after the pandemic. After the pandemic, people realize substantially the importance of the digital tools. Before they were like, oh, digital, that's just, oh, you know, this little social media I do, it's fun. But during the pandemic, I don't want to say thanks to the pandemic, but because of the pandemic, people realized the importance of digital tools, what it can give them, that even though all the sectors stopped, digital things continued, but also helped society live and reach everybody and continue living. And some people think that digital tools can leave some people behind, but actually digital tools can help you reach people that are remote. It's easier to reach somebody digitally who are remote than have them come to the capital, etc. I wouldn't say that we fixed all the problems, that Morocco fixed all the problems, that nobody was left behind. I wouldn't say this, but we're working towards this goal, and digital tools can help towards this goal. I mean, even, yeah, so that's, so digital tools can help and will help, and we're working together with other multiple society actors, again, civil society, private sector, citizens, universities, to reach this goal. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this highlight. Again, I think you've highlighted so from carrying on from the first panel, we had seen where Dr. Obi had mentioned that indeed the digital tools can be democratized such that the design and the way you reach people that are so-called, you know, excluded can actually, like you said, the digital tools can actually help inclusion, you know. And again, I know that sometime we met during the Mo Ibrahim Governance Weekend in Cote d'Ivoire, and in one of the sessions we had talked about the level of education, how almost 70%, you know, of Africans are not able to really, and the kids who are supposed to be in school are not even able to read and write. And so how do you talk about digitization and inclusion for these kind of people who are in the rural areas? And I think what Dr. Mezu had just highlighted basically show that where there is a will and where there is a, you know, by intention, you know, we can actually design tools that can help us reach as much as we can. And indeed, it could be a time to leapfrog. I'm sure you've heard the leapfrog term, to say some of the things that we couldn't do during the traditional time. With a crisis like this, we're able to leapfrog, and digital tools and transformation can actually help, you know, increase inclusion. So I want to come back to you on this, right? You've talked about the different ways we can get, you know, young people, the need basically to get young people into the space, right? Now, the question is, indeed, what else do we need to do to really build a generation of young leaders, right? How do we really get a critical mass of young leaders that are really speaking the language of governance, that really are interested and are interested in serving the citizens, you know? So how do we move from concepts and ideologies to the actual reality and building a critical mass of young people who are moving along this line, who are looking forward to service as a key agenda, so that it is, you know, it is balanced. From where you sit, what do you think we should be doing in this case?
Thank you so much, Edwin. If I may, just to comment on the online, because I heard also on the previous panel talking about democratization and how the digital helped democratize, and then I come to the question of youth leadership. I think the case study of Morocco is a great example that the potential of the digital, but we are really behind as continents, and the digital divide is real. So as much as we say it democratized and we have more people in the room and more people here present who could otherwise not have access, where ministers are speaking and they could, you know, challenge them on the chat, at the same time, it's only 30% of us who are online. And I was trying to pull up statistics from ECA, actually, which says that 460 million of us in Africa have a phone, and only 120 million of us have a phone that actually has access to internet. Only 60 million of those have the internet, and only 45 million have a stable, regular internet at affordable price. This is how we end up from, you know, really having a smartphone, and they say everyone in Africa has a smartphone, to actually only 30% of us are online. 70% of Africa is offline. And that means, you know, when you say young people are the one to change the narrative of the continent, are the one to make, you know, Africa a global player on the continent. And we know that online plays a critical role. But if we imagine if Africa's population is 90% online, what kind of conversation shift about the vaccine and about, you know, decolonization and about all of the issues we talk about? It's because we're not online, and the few of us who are online are screaming and are making noise, but it's not reaching where we want to be. So I really want to emphasize that governments are really responsible to collaborate with all stakeholders, with public-private partnership, to crash internet crisis, to make sure we have internet and to make sure we have electricity. Because without power, there is no internet, there is no digitalization. And we're talking about 50% of Africa does not have electricity. And so as much as we want to praise the internet and the transformation of the digital space, we are behind as a continent. And then the second question on youth leadership and how we can make sure, first of all, we need to have role models. Okay, to have youth in leadership who are serving, you know, a continent and not serving themselves, we cannot become product of the same system. And so far, we are still talking about institutions that are fragile, that are corrupt, that are, you know, have a lot of illness that needs to be transformed. So how are you going to bring a young person and put one young person as the head of whatever position and be like, okay, we gave you the space, and then that young person fails, and then we say, okay, young people can't deliver. We're setting that young person to failure because the whole system needs transformation. So we cannot talk about, you know, youth coming in and bringing new energy and transforming while the whole of society need to be engaged, because we have to just admit we need to transform the system. It's not enough to just respond to it. It's not enough to just make quick solutions to it. We need young people in masses. If you really want to transform public institutions, it's not enough to have a young minister or a young advisor or a young ad hoc things that depend on political will. You have to institutionalize, and that's why I'm emphasizing on institutionalization of co-leadership. Youth have to be in every layer of decision making. That's how we're going to transform the whole of system. And I want to also address the gender question which you asked first, and I didn't address it. Young women is like a double crime. You're young and you're female, and there is no policy for young women. Right now, there are policies for women and quotas for women, and there are frameworks for women. And then there are policies for youth, there are quotas for youth, there are policies that we're pushing for youth, but there is nothing for young women. When you go to the youth space, the young women feel excluded. When you go to the women's space, the young women feel excluded because of the generational divide. Where is young women policies? Where are they in the decision making? How are we making sure that they also have a say and contribution? Girls and young women also need to have their own specific framework for us to really move forward in a more youthful leadership and a more gender equality leadership.
It's always so awesome to listen to you, Aya, because I think, you know, honestly, it's, yes, there's the reality. There's where we are, and there's where we are heading. There's where we are going to. And I think we all recognize the fact that it will take some work. And I do believe, as in the previous panel, it takes decision. It takes adaptive leadership to begin to think about how do you design a process that brings in the market, which is the private sector, and the government, to ensure that the, you know, people who are currently excluded by virtue of their location in the rural areas or their lack of access to the internet, who are not online, how do we get them on board? And indeed, this is going to start another kind of conversation, but I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to come back to Honorable Minister. Okay, now we've talked about this, and it was asked in the first panel. Aidan had said we cannot allow a crisis like this go to waste. We should make the most of it, right? And Aya had talked about the institutionalization of co-leadership, right? Now, let's think about inclusion and service delivery. Let's think about all of the lessons we have learned from this crisis. We are still in it. We're not out yet, right? In terms of the policy areas, what do you think should be the priorities right now? Not just for Morocco, but what we think are the African continent. What should we be prioritizing to ensure that inclusion is real, and this large cohort of people who are not currently, who don't have the space, particularly digitally. How do we get them to, to really deliver on what we are supposed to deliver? What are the policy priorities in this case, or that the government should prioritize? I'd like to get your thoughts again for all of us.
Okay, so thank you for this question. So I know the statistics for Africa. Maybe in Morocco, we're a little bit more, I would say, lucky because 84% of the population already uses the internet. Households that have a smartphone are more than 90%. So the internet penetration, and so the mobile phone penetration is 99%. So we're ahead in terms of access to the internet. However, I do not believe this is sufficient. I think, so this is important, but not sufficient. So I think the next step is having people, is working on the human factors. So people are still afraid of digital services. So when I go and say, oh, one of my missions as a minister is to make sure we deliver more public services to citizens. That a lot of their paperwork they can do online, and I promise that this can help them because they don't need to travel all the way to the capital. They don't need to wait in lines. So I tell people are scared because they're like, wait, I don't know how to use digital services. I have a phone, but I don't know how to use it. I'm not sure this is going to work. Yeah, they're using, I don't know, all kind of social media, but whenever they have to fill in a form, they panic. So I think a big policy is, again, to involve, again, all actors. So I believe that everything we do has to involve all actors. And every time we develop a new public service, we have to involve citizens in the entire design. We have, everything we develop has to be citizen-centric and has to make their lives easier, and we have to involve them. And we have to make, so people have phones, they know how to use a little things, but they cannot go very far. So we need to kind of educate them on the use of smartphones. They have to be, I don't know, more comfortable when using a phone or a computer and doing a little bit more complex stuff. We need to explain, people are scared of digital things. It's unbelievable. So we have to explain to them that digital is there to help them. It's not there to kind of make their life even more complicated. So we're thinking about launching this massive awareness campaign so that people believe that digital can help them, that they can do it. We have to work on all the public services we deliver to make them more user-friendly and more citizen-centric so that they actually are making their lives easier. Everybody needs to be kind of more, again, a lot of human resources. And when I say human resources, they're within the administration, but also citizens. Another idea we're having, and it's still a little bit an idea right now, we're working on it, is, as you say, there are a lot of youth people who are already using digital services and they know how to use them. And we would love if these youth people can be a force to kind of help other people who are not comfortable with digital tools, to kind of go and teach them and help them. They can be a wonderful force. They can help their neighbors, their parents, their families, other people who are in other cities, and they can make money out of it. I mean, if they can make money out of it, that would be great because it can give them income, but they can also help in this whole digital transformation. So right now in Morocco, the internet is kind of, I wouldn't say we're perfect, but there is the internet, there are the phones, but we need to go to the next level and make it an economic force, get value out of it. I mean, the infrastructure is kind of there, it's not perfect, but it's kind of there. Now we need to make use out of it and go to the next level, have next startups, digital tools that are user-friendly and help the citizens. And that goes through kind of having everybody around and everybody working and educating people and having awareness people and awareness campaigns. And again, this idea that every administration or private company or any institution wants to make a new digital tool, they have to be aware that they have to involve citizens and users at every step of the design and make it more user-friendly and think about how they're going to use it, etc.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. Thank you, Aya Shebi. This is the session that we thought we should make things get real. And again, I think we've seen that it has gotten as real as can be. Aya's voice around not just about showing the case studies on the continent and showing examples of how young people can you can be intentional in getting young people involved in the governance space and also getting the best of their capacity. We've also seen the great example in Morocco of how they've been able to use digital tools to really to improve inclusion, particularly in response to COVID, which we're still in. And again, it's amazing to hear that Morocco indeed has reached 62% of its population with vaccination because of the massive deployment of resources, as well as all the things that the Honorable Minister has talked about. And also finally, basically she has highlighted the need for us to think about citizen-centric design in terms of tools, in terms of access, in terms of utilization of digital services. And I think those are key policies that we should begin to think about pan-African, not just on the basis of where we are right now. So 1 minute to wrap up. I would just ask everybody, Aya and Honorable Minister, for 1 minute, one wrap up. If there is one message you want anybody who is on this platform today to leave here with, they could remember everything, but something you don't want them to forget, what would that be? I will start with Aya and then I'll end with Dr. Mezo.
Actually, is what you said, and I raised my hand because I think we do have amazing examples on the continent, like Morocco, like Kenya, like other countries who have been doing the work, but we need to think Pan-African. When we stand at the global stage, we have to be united, and African countries need to help each other. If one country has more access to internet, they need to help the other country. If one country has more education, they need to help the other country. At the end of the day, if we want to reach the SDGs, we go to the United Nations as the African bloc. We don't go as our little tiny countries. And as young people as well, we are borderless. We want to think of ourselves as African. And so when we sit together and we want to say, oh, this country did and this country did, we want to say, as African youth, this is what we've been able to achieve. And this is where our continent deserves to be. So I really encourage all governments here, all networks, or civil society to think Pan-African, starting, of course, from the community and showing all these case studies. But at the end of the day, we want to stand as a global player.
Thank you so much, Aya. Dr. Mezo, please. Honorable Minister.
So my message is that I agree with Aya that we should work together as African countries and benefit from each other's strengths. And digital tools can be a tool and should be a tool for inclusion, for helping vulnerable populations. And digital tools are not only about digital tools, they are also about human resources, about awareness, and young people can play a critical role there because they're on digital tools. They can help transform society and help society making full use of it. They can be a very important force there.
Thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, today, this session has been about inclusion, about taking the next frontier, about how we bring everybody on board in an open, in an inclusive system that give us the best result as a people. And I want to really stand on the ground that Aya has put about. I want to be seen as an African, right? And when you go outside these shows, they talk about how is from Africa, as if Africa is one country. But here, the reality is that we are really not. But the more young people we have that are in government, and I do want to really acknowledge Dr. Mezo in terms of one, even if you're not very young, you look very young. It would be great to see many more, ministers like these who are in touch with the reality of our generation. Again, I have some gray beards, but I'm sure I'm still in this generation. But the most important thing here is that we need to move as a block. We need to learn from each other. We need to open the space for citizens. And ultimately, we need to be speaking with one voice. And thank you so much all for participating. And I look forward to the next fantastic summit and the next other opportunity we can talk again. Thank you, OGP, and thank you for this, my guest.